The fence ran straight across the pasture. Wire stretched taut between posts set at regular intervals, dividing land that looked identical on both sides. Grass was short everywhere, grazed down evenly, its colour dulled by heat and dust. From a distance, the fence meant nothing. Up close, it mattered. The mare stood a few steps from it, head lowered, ears angled outward rather than forward. She had stopped not because she was tired, but because the air ahead offered no advantage over the air behind her. The shade fell short. A single line of trees followed the fence on one side only, their canopies narrow and uneven. By this hour, the sun had shifted just far enough that their shadows no longer reached the wire. Dark patches lay scattered and incomplete, breaking apart as the light moved. The mare stepped forward once. Her shoulder entered shade briefly, then passed through it and out again. The difference was immediate, not dramatic, but measurable. Heat pressed back against her coat as soon as she cleared the shadow's edge. She stopped. Standing still conserved less energy than moving slowly in heat that did not break. Her breathing deepened slightly, controlled but deliberate, nostrils widening just enough to manage temperature. The fence hummed faintly, not audibly, but through vibration carried by the wire as wind brushed past without strength. The sound meant little. The structure meant more. Beyond it, the pasture looked the same, but it did not behave the same. The mare shifted her weight and lifted her head, scanning the far side. No water reflected, no darker soil suggested dampness, no additional trees waited just out of sight. The land beyond the fence offered distance, not relief. She turned her head back toward the trees. Other horses stood there, spaced apart, each claiming a narrow patch of shade that shortened by the minute. No one moved aggressively. This was not competition yet, only awareness that the resource was shrinking. The mare took 2 slow steps closer to the fence. Heat radiated up from the ground, rising into her chest and belly. The soil here was compacted, stripped by hooves and sun, holding warmth rather than releasing it. Each exhale carried dryness with it. She paused again. The fence represented effort without guarantee. Crossing it would require speed, contact, and commitment, all costly in this heat. Staying meant rationing shade that no longer covered what it should have. This was the problem. Not confinement. Compression. The environment had narrowed options without closing them entirely. The fence did not trap her, the sun did. A fly landed on her flank. She flicked her skin once, sharply, then stilled again. Movement attracted more insects. Stillness discouraged some, but not all. The shade receded another step. The mare felt it without looking, the way heat filled space that had briefly been cooler, the way air stopped circulating beneath leaves as their shadows pulled away. She shifted her stance, aligning her body so that one side remained shaded while the other took the sun. This bought time, not comfort. Across the fence, grass lay untouched, slightly taller. It held promise only if the heat eased enough to make movement worthwhile. The mare waited. Not for shade to return. For the moment when waiting would cost more than moving. The fence line held steady. The trees did not. The sun continued its slow slide, pulling shelter away in increments too small to feel urgent, until suddenly there was not enough left to share. The mare raised her head fully now, ears forward, decision approaching. The shade had fallen short, and standing between a fence that divided land and a sun that erased shelter, the mare understood that this day would not force her suddenly. It would pressure her gradually, shrinking margins until even a simple pause required accounting for heat, effort, and the cost of choosing wrong ground at the wrong hour. The herd began to shift without signal. No call passed between them. No sudden movement broke the stillness. One horse stepped out of shade, then another adjusted position to reclaim the darker ground left behind. The pattern repeated, quiet and incremental, like water redistributing itself when a channel narrows. The mare felt the change before she saw it. Heat increased not because the sun intensified, but because bodies moved. Dust lifted briefly, then settled again, coating legs and lower flanks. The air beneath the trees thickened, losing what little circulation it had held. Shade was no longer neutral. It had direction now. The mare took 2 steps forward, entering a narrow strip of shadow cast by a leaning trunk. It covered her neck and withers, but left her hindquarters exposed. She stood like this for several seconds, evaluating whether partial relief justified the posture. It did not. Standing crooked increased muscle tension and heat retention. Relief needed to be balanced, not segmented. Another horse moved closer, not aggressively, just near enough that distance shortened uncomfortably. The mare flicked an ear back, then forward again. No challenge followed. This was not dominance. It was compression. As the sun climbed higher, shadows tightened against the trunks, becoming smaller and darker, less forgiving. Horses that had stood comfortably minutes earlier now found themselves half exposed, then fully so. One mare pinned her ears briefly when another stepped too close. Then both settled again. No one wanted to fight. Fighting created heat faster than it solved anything. The mare near the fence watched this carefully. She did not join the cluster. Entering now would mean negotiating space repeatedly, burning energy for a resource that was already failing. She turned her head toward the fence again. Beyond it, the pasture remained empty. No horses grazed there, no movement disturbed the grass. The absence itself suggested something, either restriction or lack of reason to cross earlier. She stepped closer to the wire and sniffed. The smell of grass beyond was faintly greener, less dusty. Shade was absent there, but space was not. Air might move more freely without bodies clustering beneath trees. Still, the fence represented interruption. Crossing meant effort, lifting, pushing, committing, and once crossed, return would not be immediate. Gates lay farther down the line, beyond sight. The mare paused again. Behind her, the shade contracted further. One horse stepped fully into the sun and did not move back, choosing motion over waiting. She walked slowly along the tree line, head low, searching for another fragment of shadow that no longer existed. The herd had entered a new phase. Shade was no longer shelter, it was a signal. Those who remained beneath the trees were not resting, they were delaying. Those who left were not fleeing, they were reallocating. The mare shifted her weight and stepped parallel to the fence, moving without committing to either side. This allowed air to pass more freely along her body, reducing heat slightly. It was a small gain, but real. As she walked, she noticed the fence vibrate faintly again. Wind, not strong, but present. On the far side, grass moved subtly, bending and releasing. On this side, the trees blocked that movement, trapping air beneath their canopy. The mare stopped. This mattered. Shade without airflow no longer cooled effectively. Open ground with light wind could. The choice was no longer between sun and shade, it was between stillness and movement. She lifted her head and looked down the fence line toward where it dipped and rose again, toward where a gate might exist, toward where humans sometimes appeared with water or instruction. Nothing moved there now, but the land beyond the fence was not holding heat the same way. Behind her, the herd settled into uneasy stillness, bodies close enough that insects gathered more densely, tails flicking more often, breathing deepening. The mare took one more step away from the trees. Heat touched her fully now, but air moved across her coat. It was not comfort, but it was relief. She paused there, halfway between shade and commitment, understanding that this day would not reward staying close to what used to work. It would reward recognizing when a resource had become directional, useful only if approached from the right angle, at the right time, and abandoned before competition, and heat erased its value entirely. The shade had fallen short, and the herd, slowly and without conflict, was beginning to respond, not by gathering tighter, but by spreading, each horse recalculating how much sun could be tolerated before movement became the only remaining form of cooling. The sound came before the shape. Metal against metal, distant and irregular, carried across the pasture in broken fragments. It was not loud, but it cut through heat more clearly than wind ever had. The mare lifted her head immediately, ears locking forward. People. The sound repeated, closer now, followed by the low murmur of voices. Human noise did not blend into the landscape the way natural sound did. It interrupted it, introducing rhythm where none had existed. The herd reacted unevenly. A few horses raised their heads at once. Others did not move, conserving energy until certainty arrived. No one bolted. This was familiar territory, not threat. The mare stepped closer to the fence. Down the line, near a dip where the ground sloped slightly and trees thinned, movement appeared. A gate swung inward, its shadow briefly lengthening before collapsing again as the sun climbed. Water followed. Not visible yet, but announced by behavior. Horses farther along the fence began to turn, orienting their bodies toward the opening. Heads lowered, then lifted again, confirming direction. The shade behind the mare no longer mattered. Water recalibrated everything. She walked now, not hurried, but decisively, pace steady enough to conserve heat while still closing distance. Other horses joined her movement, spacing naturally, avoiding contact. This was not a rush, it was alignment. As they approached the gate, the air changed again. The ground here was darker, more compacted, holding less loose dust. Heat still pressed down, but anticipation altered perception, sharpening focus and tightening movement. A trough came into view, metal, low, half-shadowed by a simple structure that did not offer full shade, but enough to break direct sun. The mare slowed. Approach mattered. Crowding wasted energy and raised temperature faster than thirst could be relieved. Horses knew this without instruction. They formed a loose arc, waiting for the first drinkers to finish before stepping forward. The mare did not push. She waited at the edge, breathing controlled, ears still forward. When her turn came, she stepped in, lowered her head, and drank deeply. The water was warm, not refreshing, but effective. She swallowed steadily, rhythm deliberate, stopping before fullness slowed her breathing too much. Overdrinking in heat brought its own cost. She stepped back and stood. Water changed the equation, but it did not solve it. Shade remained limited. Heat remained present. The day was still young enough to punish excess movement. The people closed the gate again, not to trap, to manage. Beyond the fence, the pasture remained untouched, grass moving lightly in wind that did not reach the trees. For a moment, the mare considered it again, then dismissed it. Water without space would only reset the same pressure later. The herd began to spread out slightly now, some returning toward the trees, others lingering near the trough where damp ground cooled hooves marginally. The mare chose neither immediately. She stood where air moved best, body angled to catch what breeze existed, letting water settle before deciding what came next. Relief had arrived, but narrowly. It had come in the form of access, not abundance, a brief correction rather than a solution. The fence still divided land, shade still failed to cover enough ground, the sun still climbed. The mare understood this clearly. Human intervention had bought time, nothing more. As she lifted her head and scanned the pasture again, she did not look for comfort. She looked for spacing, airflow, and the next adjustment that would be required when water alone stopped being enough. Because on days like this, survival was not about finding shelter once, but about recognizing how often shelter needed to be redefined as conditions shifted. The shade had fallen short, water had arrived late, and the mare, standing between them, prepared for the next decision long before it would be forced. The afternoon did not improve, it only shifted. The sun moved higher, flattening shadows even further, pressing light straight down instead of allowing it to stretch. The narrow shade beneath the trees fractured completely, breaking into small, isolated patches that no longer aligned with bodies at rest. The mare stood apart from the herd now, not isolated, deliberate. She had positioned herself where air moved most consistently, a shallow rise where the fence dipped and the ground reflected less heat upward. Here, the breeze slipped past rather than stalled, carrying warmth away in increments small enough to matter. Her breathing remained steady. Water had stabilized her, but it had not cooled her. Muscles still held heat. Joints still absorbed impact from hard ground. The difference was margin, thin but present. Around her, the herd adjusted again. Some horses returned briefly to the trees, only to step out again when shade failed to hold. Others lingered near the trough, then drifted away as crowding erased any benefit. No one settled. This was not unrest. It was recalibration. The mare watched without moving, ears rotating slowly, tracking shifts in sound and posture. Flies gathered and dispersed. Tails flicked in irregular rhythm. Heat continued to press, indifferent to choice. The fence no longer commanded attention. It had served its purpose, a boundary that delayed, then redirected. Now it was background again, no more important than the line of trees or the trough. What mattered was spacing, movement, timing. The mare stepped forward and walked slowly along the rise, placing herself where shadow from a single post briefly crossed the ground. She stood there for a moment, letting the post's thin line break the sun on her shoulder. It lasted seconds. Enough. She moved again. This was the pattern now. Brief pauses, shallow movement, no long commitments. Rest had become dynamic rather than static. Waiting no longer restored, it only accumulated cost. As the day stretched on, the herd spread wider across the pasture, each horse finding its own balance between sun, air, and distance from others. The pressure eased not because conditions improved, but because no single place held enough advantage to draw them together. The mare lowered her head briefly, not to graze, the grass offered little, but to stretch her neck and release tension. She lifted it again slowly, scanning the land beyond the fence one last time. Nothing had changed there, nor would it today. She turned back into the pasture, choosing continuity over curiosity, movement over waiting. The fence remained behind her, quiet and irrelevant now. The shade had fallen short. Water had helped, but only temporarily. What carried her through the rest of the day was not shelter, not intervention, but the quiet discipline of refusing to stay still once stillness stopped paying back, and the understanding that on days shaped by heat and human boundaries alike, survival belonged not to those who found comfort, but to those who recognized earliest when comfort had narrowed into something that could no longer be weighted inside. The mare walked on. The sun held. And the pasture, wide and ordinary, continued to demand adjustment rather than rest, a demand she met not with urgency, but with steady movement that preserved what mattered most, the ability to keep choosing, even when no choice offered relief.